You ever meet someone whose silence feels louder than other people's shouting? Someone who walks into a room, and even though nobody knows her story, everyone senses she's carrying something heavy, something sharp, something weighting. That's the kind of woman Karen is. And before we go any further, yes, you watching, tell me in the comments where you're joining us from and what time it is where you are, because you're about to witness a revenge story that stretches deeper than betrayal, darker than corporate greed, and sharper than any knife ever held in a trembling hand. Karen, 54 years old, gray streaks in her hair she never bothers to hide, a posture that looks humble until you look closer and see how steady she stands, and a heartbeat that's been counting down for years toward one moment. The moment she takes back everything that was stolen. But before we dive into the blood-warm underbelly of her revenge, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because once you hear what this woman's been through and what she's about to do, you aren't going to want to miss a single twist. Now lean in, because everything begins with a whisper Karen heard in a place where whispers were never supposed to exist. Inside the polished marble halls of a defense contractor's headquarters, where everything gleams, everything is hush-hush, and everything has a price, Karen wasn't always a woman who made powerful men tremble. She used to be the dependable one, the one who showed up early, stayed late, and solved problems other people created. She'd spent 32 years in logistics, audits, and field coordination for a major U.S. military supplier, handling the paperwork and oversight so soldiers in the field could breathe a little easier. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't political. She wasn't the type to cause trouble. But she was the type to notice things, the type to quietly file away details, the type to memorize every inconsistency until the full picture clicked together like steel plates forming the shape of a weapon. And the moment she realized her company, the one she'd given her life to, was covering up a catastrophic mistake, she knew her silence was the only thing keeping a certain CFO safe, and a certain general from discovering the truth. It started on a rainy Wednesday, the kind of drizzling, gray morning where everything feels damp, even the air inside the building. Karen sat at her desk reviewing shipment logs for a new cost-cutting initiative pushed aggressively by the CFO, a man named Douglas R. Haverton. Sharp chin, expensive suits, eyes that always looked slightly amused, as if he couldn't decide whether the people around him were tools or toys. He had slashed budgets across departments to earn himself a performance bonus so fat it could feed a family for a decade, and he'd done it quickly. Too quickly. Karen knew because she was the one who had to implement it. She'd been the one checking new procurement sources, overseeing changes in suppliers, and watching in slow horror as corners got cut in places where corners should have never existed. And that was the day she spotted it. A shipment log anomaly, a batch of reinforced structural brackets, the kind used in military vehicles and field equipment, sourced from a new overseas supplier she'd never heard of. Cheaper, yes. Faster, yes. But she recognized the manufacturing code. She'd seen it before in a safety recall years ago. These brackets had a known failure point, a high stress. A failure point Haverton conveniently pushed under the rug for the sake of cost optimization. Her stomach dropped. And then she found the second anomaly. And the third. Soon, there were 23 separate shipments flagged with the same problem, all routed through a special authorization channel controlled directly by Haverton's office. It wasn't just negligence. This was intentional. He'd bypassed the engineering quality review entirely. Karen felt the cold realization settle in her gut like a block of lead. If these brackets failed in the field, soldiers would pay the price. Lives would be lost, missions compromised, and everything would trace back to one greedy executive who thought a bonus mattered more than human beings. She needed to tell someone, but Haverton already knew. She'd figured it out. because that very afternoon, he appeared at her desk with a smile too bright to be friendly, leaning down until she could smell his mint-scented breath as he said, "Karen, I think you've been overextending yourself. I've reviewed your workload. You'll be transitioning to reduced duties for the next 6 months." Reduced duties, a polite corporate phrase for stay quiet. She looked up at his smirking face and felt the oldest, rust part of her rise. The part of her that had fought for everything in her life. The part that once stood by a hospital bed while the man she loved died because military-grade equipment had failed him in the field. Back then, she hadn't known who to blame. But now she did. The reduced duties weren't enough for him. Not long after, whispers spread across the building that she was slipping, that she was showing signs of age, that she'd misfiled critical documents, none of which were true. But Haverton didn't need the truth. He needed a narrative. And he built one expertly. By the end of the month, Karen was pushed out of every major project she had once overseen. Her team avoided eye contact. Meetings suddenly didn't include her responsibilities anymore. And her badge access was quietly restricted so she could no longer enter key operational floors. He was isolating her. He was erasing her. He was clearing the only person who could expose him. But he made one mistake. He underestimated the quiet resilience of a 54-year-old woman who had spent decades surviving bureaucracy, broken systems, military politics, and personal loss. A woman who had already buried the love of her life. A woman whose grief had sharpened into something colder and more dangerous than anger. Karen didn't collapse. She planned, and her plan began with a single, calculated move. She sent an anonymous package to one man, General Dawson Calder, a high-ranking, no-nonsense official with a reputation for sniffing out internal wrongdoing like a bloodhound, a man Haverton feared. The package contained only 3 items: a copy of the altered shipping logs, a list of failed stress points from the recalled manufacturer. And a simple handwritten note. Check the brackets. Karen expected a slow process, bureaucracy, months of silence. But she underestimated the general. Because the very next week, the company went into lockdown. Internal audits, military inspectors, meetings behind closed doors, executives sweating through their collars as General Calder himself walked the halls with the kind of authority that made even vice presidents straighten their backs. And then came the moment Karen never saw coming. Message. Not from the general. Not from the auditors, but from Haverton. And he called her into her conference room, empty, cold, blinds drawn, and locked the door behind her. His smile was gone. His voice was low, and his eyes were no longer amused. "So," he whispered, "you think you're clever?" Her pulse thudded. "I don't know what you mean." But he leaned in, his voice a hiss of poison. "You tipped off the dot. You think I don't know? You think a man in my position doesn't have ways of finding things out?" Karen breathed slowly, refusing to let fear show. "You ruined months of work," he snarled. "You sabotaged the company, and you have no idea who you've crossed." She held his gaze. "I crossed someone who cut costs that could get people killed." For a moment, something ugly twisted in his face. "People die all the time," he said. "War has expenses." That's the moment something inside her snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like the soft, final click of a lock being sealed. She knew then that there was only one path forward, and it wasn't turning back, because what she didn't know, what she wouldn't discover until it was too late, was that Haverton had already planned her removal long before she sent that anonymous package. He wasn't going to fire her. He wasn't going to discredit her. He was going to destroy her, and the first step in his plan was already unfolding. Karen didn't know yet that her financial accounts were being accessed, that false expense reports were being drafted under her name, that her credentials had been used to sign approvals she never touched, that a trail of digital breadcrumbs was being laid to make her the scapegoat of the very scandal she exposed. Because when General Calder found out about the faulty brackets, he would look for someone to blame, and Haverton was making sure that someone would be her. But as Karen left that conference room, feeling the heavy weight of Haverton's threat settling on her shoulders, she didn't panic. She didn't run, and she didn't break. She simply whispered to herself, "Not this time." Because what Haverton could not possibly understand was that Karen hadn't just set him up for investigation. She had set him up for destruction. And in the shadows of her quiet, steady resolve, her real revenge was only beginning. Karen walked out of that conference room with Haverton's threats still echoing in her ears. But something inside her felt strangely steady, like she'd finally reached the part of the storm where the wind stops pretending and shows its true strength. You ever feel that chilling shift when you suddenly realize your enemy has already fired the first shot, and now it's your turn to aim? That's what settled in her chest that moment. A cold, exacting clarity, the kind that makes a person dangerous. But clarity doesn't prevent shock, and the next morning hit her harder than she expected. She walked into the office as usual, scanning her badge at the turnstile, only for it to flash red, not yellow, not see security, just solid red. Access denied. She tried again, because people always try again, even when they know the answer won't change. Red. The guard, who'd known her for years, shrugged without meeting her eyes and called down to HR. They told him to escort her upstairs. Escort. A word that pretends to be polite while twisting the knife. Karen followed the guard, her mind reeling, but her face calm, because this wasn't surprise. This was confirmation. Haverton had moved fast, faster than even she predicted. But what she didn't realize yet was that he had moved in ways she never would have imagined. Not until she stepped into that small HR office and saw the accusations lined up like bullets aimed at her name. Expense, fraud. Document tampering, unauthorized approvals, suspicious system access, all traced back to her logins, her credentials, her ID, her name. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She hadn't touched any of those things, but that didn't matter, because the digital trail looked perfect. Too perfect, and the HR director, a man who used to greet her warmly for years, now stared at her with the stiff detachment of someone terrified of losing their job. "Karen," he said quietly, "we've been alerted to a number of serious concerns. You've been placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation." Karen breathed slowly. "This is Haverton's doing." The HR director swallowed. "These logs came directly from IT. This isn't about politics." And that was when Karen understood something crucial. Haverton hadn't just tampered with records. He'd weaponized fear. HR was afraid. IT was afraid. Everyone was afraid. And fear is the sharpest tool in a corrupt man's hand. One push and people scrambled to protect themselves, even if it means sacrificing someone else. They asked for her badge. They asked for her keys. They asked her to sign a temporary leave document. And as they asked, she felt something inside her begin to grow. Not panic, not despair, but a slow-burning fury aimed with sniper precision. She signed nothing, not a word, not a line, not a single corporate trap dressed as paperwork. And when she walked out of the office, she noticed the looks, the whispers, the sideways glances, the nervous avoidance. People didn't look at her like a colleague anymore. They looked at her like a scandal waiting to happen. But Karen wasn't thinking about humiliation. She was thinking about the general. Because if Haverton crafted a digital alibi, then the truth was buried somewhere deep in those systems. And only one person in the entire building had the authority, no, the power, to dig it out. General Dawson Calder. The man with the icy stare and military precision. The one who could make CEOs sweat with a single raised eyebrow. And Karen had a sickening feeling that Haverton's plan wasn't just to blame her. It was also to mislead Calder, redirecting the investigation toward her as their rogue internal actor. But here's where things took a twist Haverton didn't foresee. Because the general wasn't just investigating the brackets. He was investigating everything, and the first signal of that came later that afternoon, when Karen received a call from an unknown, secure number. A gravelly voice greeted her with sharp, clipped words. "This is Calder. We need to talk." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She didn't expect him to contact her directly, but something in his tone told her he already suspected the truth. Or at least suspected that the truth wasn't what Haverden wanted him to see. They met at a quiet location, a nondescript government building with fluorescent lights and the faint smell of old paper. Calder got straight to the point, his eyes scanning her face like he was trained to detect lies in the twitch of a muscle. "Your name is all over the flag dater," he said. Karen nodded. "Because someone put it there. Haverden. Who else?" Calder didn't react. He sat still, silent, analyzing. You could almost hear the gears shifting in his mind. Finally, he said, "I've seen men try to hide things before, but I've also seen people sabotage investigations to protect themselves. Do you think I sabotaged anything?" she asked. He leaned forward. "I think you're either the smartest whistleblower I've ever met, or the unluckiest scapegoat." That's when Karen felt a pulse of something unexpected, hope. Because Calder wasn't convinced. He wasn't fooled, but he wasn't convinced either. She needed proof, real proof, something that couldn't be erased, altered, or dismissed. But how do you expose a man who controls every file, every approval channel, every digital fingerprint? You find the one place he can't erase. The past. Karen took a deep breath and told the general about the recall, the manufacturing code, the old safety reports she had archived in her personal notebooks long before Haverden arrived. Those handwritten notes, stored in her garage and touched for years, those could connect the faulty brackets to the current shipments, proving the cost-cutting scheme was deliberate. Calder's eyes narrowed. "Get those notes? Not so simple," she said. "My house was broken into last night." Calder stiffened. "Anything taken?" She nodded slowly. "Paperwork, boxes, old notebooks, nothing else." The general let out a silent breath, like a man who just watched a puzzle piece click into place. "Haverden's panicking, and desperate men make stupid mistakes," Karen murmured. But she wasn't done, not even close, because as she sat across from the general, watching him process the scope of Haverden's actions, a new idea formed in her mind, sharper, riskier, but devastating if it worked. Haverden had tampered with her digital identity, but what if she tampered with the truth he had wrapped himself in? What if she gave the investigation a direction he couldn't control, a narrative he never expected? And that idea began forming like a storm cloud, slow, dangerous, growing. Calder stood. "I'll be in touch. Don't leave town," she smirked bitterly. Wasn't planning on it. But as he walked away, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that Haverden's shadow was already closing in again. And that feeling was confirmed that very night, when she returned home and found an envelope taped to her front door. No name, no address, just a single sheet of paper inside, a printed message. "Stop talking to the general." No signature, no threats spelled out, just that one line. But sometimes the absence of details is the loudest threat of all. Karen stared at the paper, her heart thudding, but not from fear, from exhilaration. Because Haverden had just made a critical mistake. He let her know she was still a threat. And if you tell a woman like Karen she's dangerous, she starts acting like it. She didn't go inside. She didn't turn on lights. She didn't touch anything that could be traced. Instead, she drove. Not aimlessly, methodically. She drove to a safe location she hadn't visited in years. A small storage unit she kept under an old name most people didn't even know she once used. Inside that storage unit, she pulled out something Haverden could never have predicted. Not paperwork, not logs, not documents. A journal. Her husband's journal. The one he kept while deployed, documenting equipment failures, near misses, supply shortages, and one specific incident involving a structural bracket failure nearly identical to the ones being shipped now, the same manufacturer. The same flaw. The same risk Haverden had dismissed for bonus stock. Karen held the journal in her hands, trembling not from weakness, but from the dawning realization that she had something more powerful than evidence. She had testimony, and the dead speak louder than the living when the right person is listening. She flipped the journal open, scanning pages filled with her husband's writing, feeling each sentence press deeper into her resolve. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was justice sharpened into a weapon. And she wasn't done sharpening. Because the next morning, Karen sent a copy of one journal entry, just one, to Haverden's private email. No subject, no explanation, just the scanned page. She didn't need to say anything. The message was clear. I know more than you think. I have more than you know. And I'm coming within hours. She received a response from a burner account with a single sentence. You're making a grave mistake. Karen smiled coldly, her fingers tightening round the journal. No, she whispered to herself, you are. And just like that, the battleground shifted. Haverden was no longer hunting her. He was reacting to her. But the terrifying part, the part Karen wouldn't discover until part 3, was that Haverden wasn't reacting alone. Because someone else had entered the game, someone who had been watching everything, someone with motives far darker than Haverden's ambition and far more dangerous than Karen's revenge. The moment Karen realized someone else had entered the game, the air around her felt tighter, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. You ever feel the eerie pressure before a revelation hits you? Like the world is holding its breath, waiting to see whether you rise or fall. That's what wrapped around her as she stared at her husband's journal, wondering who else might be watching every move she made. Because Haverden wasn't smart enough to anticipate that journal. He wasn't clever enough to know her past, but someone else clearly was. Someone who had been following the story long before she ever stepped into that conference room. Someone who knew exactly what strings to pull and when to pull them. But Karen didn't know that yet. Not fully. What she did know was that the moment she sent that scan to Haverden, she lit a fuse under him, a fuse that was already burning too fast, and he reacted exactly how she expected, with threats disguised as warnings. But behind those empty words, she sensed something else. Panic, real panic. The kind a guilty man feels when he realizes the past he buried wasn't as deep as he thought. She waited for his next move. But instead, the general called. This time, his tone was different. Not suspicious. Not probing. Urgent. Double quotes. Where are you? He demanded the moment she answered, out. She said calmly, why? Because your house was watched today. She froze. By who? That's what I'm trying to determine. A pause. Then, and Karen, they weren't after evidence. The way he said they made something cold creep into her spine. Who is they? She asked. If I knew that, he growled, I wouldn't be calling you. She tightened her grip on the phone. What do you need from me? I need you to tell me the truth. General Dawson Calder said, everything. From the beginning, no omissions. She almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was ironic how he thought she still had the luxury of holding anything back. There's more, she said quietly. A lot more than meet me, he said. Somewhere secure. But secure wasn't real anymore. Not when someone was breaking into her house. Not when someone was following her. Not when messages were showing up on her door like silent landmines. She shook her head, even though he couldn't see it. No, not yet, Karen. It's not you I don't trust, she cut in. It's your systems, your channels, your people that made the line go quiet. And silence, from a man like Calder, was more powerful than shouting. Finally, he said, you think there's a mole? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. He understood. Stay where you are, he said. I'll send someone I trust. But that sentence, that single promise, was the moment the real trap began tightening around her. Because the person he trusted was the one she should have feared the most. Karen didn't know it yet, but the man Calder sent had been waiting for this moment, not for her protection, for access. Access to the journal, access to her plans, access to the very evidence Haverden needed destroyed. And as she waited in that dimly lit storage unit, journal pressed against her chest, she heard footsteps approaching outside. Calder had said he was sending someone discreet, someone reliable, someone off the books. But when the lock on the unit door clicked and the metal slid aside, she didn't see discreet. She didn't see reliable. She saw danger wrapped in a government badge, a tall, Sharp-eyed man stepped inside, his stance controlled, his expression unreadable. Karen, he asked, his voice smooth, almost too smooth. General Calder sent me. She stared at him, her instincts screaming before he even finished the sentence. Name? She asked. Agent Lorne. He replied without hesitation. That was problem number 1. Calder never used the word agent. He never used titles. He never used classifications. He used names. First. Names. Always. And this man hadn't given 1. Karen tightened her grip on the journal. Calder said someone he trusted. The man nodded with a perfectly practiced smile. That's me. That was problem number 2. Calder didn't smile, and people Calder trusted didn't smile either. She stepped back an inch. What did Calder say to you exactly? He said you were in danger, the man replied, taking one subtle step toward her. He said you had sensitive documents. I'm here to collect them and transport them securely. Problem number 3. Calder would have never asked to collect anything. He would have demanded she bring it directly to him. Karen's heart pounded. I'm not giving you anything. His smile widened, not reassuringly, but like a predator pleased when prey finally realizes the situation. Karen, he said softly, don't make this difficult. She moved before he finished speaking, not out of panic. Out of instinct honed by years of dealing with men who underestimated her. She grabbed the metal flashlight on the shelf behind her and swung it with enough force to make the sound echo through the storage unit. It connected with his forearm as he reached for her, and he snarled, the practiced calm cracking like thin ice. You're making a mistake. He snapped. No, she growled, already backing toward the door. I'm correcting one. She burst into the hallway and sprinted through the facility, the journal tucked tight under her arm. She didn't look back, but she heard him following, fast, heavy footsteps slamming against the concrete. She took corners sharply, weaving through storage corridors, her breath ragged, but her mind razor-focused. She knew these halls. He didn't, and that gave her the edge for now. She made it to the exit, shoved the door open, and bolted into the night. The cold air hit her like a shockwave, but she didn't stop, not even when she reached her car. She dove in, slammed the door, locked it, and peeled out of the lot just as the man burst through the exit behind her. He stopped. He watched her taillights disappear. And he smiled, not out of frustration, but satisfaction, because he hadn't been sent to retrieve evidence. He had been sent to confirm one thing, that Karen still had it. And now, someone, not Haverton, not Calder, knew exactly where she was heading next, because Karen didn't realize that her phone, quiet in her pocket, had already been pinged the moment she answered the general's call, not by Calder, but by someone intercepting communication through a compromised channel, someone who knew Calder's voice, someone who knew Haverton's schemes, someone who wanted them both buried. And Karen, she was the key. She drove halfway across the city before pulling into an abandoned lot, her hands trembling on the steering wheel, sweat, fear, rage, all of it mixing in her chest. She didn't know who that man really was. She didn't know if Calder was still trustworthy. She didn't know how deep Haverton's corruption went. But she did know one thing. She was done reacting. She was done running. She was done waiting for someone else to move. From this moment forward, she was going on the offensive. She opened the journal and flipped to a page marked with her husband's handwriting. A page she'd never noticed before. One sentence, underlined twice, hit her like ice water. Someone at HQ knew about the bracket failures. Someone high-ranking. Someone who ordered us to stay quiet. Her breath caught. Because her husband's note was dated years before Haverton was hired, which meant Haverton wasn't the beginning of this. He was just the latest piece of a far older covered ship. And the person behind it, the real architect, wasn't hiding in a boardroom. They were hiding in the Pentagon. Karen looked up slowly, the weight of that revelation settling over her like armor. She wasn't dealing with corporate greed. She was dealing with institutional betrayal. And that meant her revenge was no longer aimed at one man. It was aimed at a system. Our system that had used her husband. Our system that had tried to silence her. A system that thought she was too old, too small, too helpless to fight back. They were about to find out exactly how wrong they were. Her phone buzzed. A single text. And no number. Stop now. Karen, you don't know who you're fighting. She stared at the message. Then she typed back, I know exactly who I'm fighting, and I'm not done. But the reply she received, that was the moment everything shifted. Because the next text read, I'm not your enemy. I'm the only one who can tell you the truth. Meet me at midnight. And the signature at the bottom made her blood turn to ice. Because it didn't say HAVERTON. It didn't say Calder. It said, your husband's last contact. Karen didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spinning like a slow, patient blade, a metronome ticking toward detonation. Every hour that passed only sharpened her resolve. She replayed the general's words, his voice dripping with that lethal combination of disappointment and controlled fury. Everyone will be in the room. Everyone. Meaning, no more shadows. No more unanswered questions. No more theories. Tomorrow, the lies would crawl into the light, and Karen would be there to watch them burn. The general's morning at 4:30. The general was already awake. He didn't hit snooze. He didn't linger. He got up the way a man rises before a duel. His morning routine was a ritual forged from decades of war and duty. Cold water splash, silent coffee, a single moment by the window, evaluating the world with that unblinking soldier stare. He wasn't thinking about battlefields today. He wasn't thinking about foreign threats. He was thinking about betrayal. Domestic, internal, insidious. He thought about the CFO's behavior yesterday in the strategic briefing. Her convenient evasiveness. Her calculated calm. The way she kept insisting on those undocumented military projects and the missing budget lines. He knew deception when he saw it. He invented half the manuals on it. He finished his coffee and set the mug down with a quiet, deliberate click. Tomorrow would not be a conversation. It would be exposure. The CFO's morning. CFO's phone buzzed at 6:12. A message from her assistant. Though both she and the sender knew that was just the cover title, the real role was confidant, analyst. And should the situation require scapegoat? Message, meeting confirmed for 10 o'clock. All department heads notified. Do you want me present? Her reply was a simple, no. She didn't need witnesses. She needed control. Full control. She paced her penthouse kitchen with her coffee cup, each step clicking across flawless marble floors. She rehearsed her position, her tone, her legal protections, her psychological angles. Before she entered any room with generals, directors, compliance chiefs, or auditors, she ensured she was the smartest, calmest, and most unpredictable person there. And today, she planned to walk into that meeting smiling, because unlike everyone else, she believed she knew something they didn't. She thought the general had no evidence. No trail. No leverage. And she thought Karen, the unassuming, quiet older employee, was no threat at all. She was wrong on all counts. Karen's morning. Karen woke up feeling like her bones were vibrating. Years of being underestimated had built an internal pressure. A tight call wound by condescension, dismissal, and passive-aggressive emails from people who thought she didn't know how powerful her access actually was. She sat at her tiny kitchen table with her notebook open. She had filled 6 pages with bullet points, arrows, notes scribbled in the margins with furious purpose. She wasn't trying to build a presentation. She was building a map of the truth, a truth no one else had pieced together yet. Not even the general. She whispered to herself as she double-checked one detail. Today, you're not looking away anymore. She didn't dress up. She didn't put on makeup. She didn't need armor. Truth was enough armor for anyone willing to carry it. The calm before the explosion. 9:52. The building was vibrating with silent tension. When Karen swiped her badge at the entrance, security nodded at her with unusual stiffness. They knew something was happening. They didn't know what, but they knew who was at the center of it. because special clearance alerts had her name on them. The general's personal car was already outside. The CFO's private elevator was locked down. Compliance officers had been seen pacing with binders. Internal legal had been called up from the 14th floor. It had been told, stand by, full forensic readiness. You don't prepare for a regular meeting like this, you prepare for war. 10 o'clock a.m. The dorkless general stood at the head of the conference table. No PowerPoint. No laptop. No briefing book. Just authority. Karen sat 3 seats down, hands folded, heart pounding, but eyes sharp. The CFO entered last, wearing that smug, softly polished smile she used whenever she wanted to project superiority. She closed the door herself, a symbolic gesture she loved. The act of sealing her arena. She took her seat across from the general. He didn't look at her. He addressed the room. Everything said today stays in this room until we resolve the matter. No leaks, no interpretations, no back channels. Understood. Everyone murmured yes. The CFO leaned back in her chair, legs crossed, projecting relaxation like a peacock spreading feathers. The general continued, we need to address the allegations regarding missing funds, unauthorized project codes, and the CFO's claim that the Department of Defense is redirecting assets without proper documentation. He paused. Karen discovered the first anomaly. The CFO's eyes flicked toward Karen, not with curiosity, but with the irritation of someone noticing an ant walking across her dinner plate. Oh, Karen, she said, with almost sweet condescension. You've found something. Karen didn't flinch. She'd been talked to like that her whole life. It didn't work anymore. She spoke evenly. Yes, several things. The CFO's smile froze. The first revealed general nodded to Karen. She stood. She opened a folder and slid a printed sheet across the table. The CFO picked it up, glanced at it, and laughed, singling out a classic dismissive tactic. This, she said lightly, this is nothing but a routine cross-charge. Please, let's not waste everyone's tea. Sit down. The general said sharply. She did. Karen continued, ignoring the CFO's interruption. That code, Karen said, pointing to the sheet, doesn't belong to our department. It doesn't belong to the either. The room went still. The CFO blinked. Karen kept going, voice steady. That code belongs to a discontinued cybersecurity initiative, one dissolved 7 years ago after a breach. That code should not exist in our current financial routing at all. She slid another document across the table, yet it appears 43 times in the last 18 months. Everyone shifted. The CFO's jaw tightened. Karen's voice sharpened. And all 43 times, they trace back to your approval. She looked directly at the CFO. No fear. No flinching. No apology. The CFO's counterattacked. CFO let out a slow, measured breath. She placed the papers down carefully. Carefully. Then she smiled. A smile designed to slice. Well, Karen, she said softly, I'm not sure where you've been getting your information, but you've clearly misinterpreted the data. These codes aren't discontinued. They're part of a legacy pipeline. Innocent, really. You've misunderstood. Karen didn't blink. The general didn't blink. Legal didn't blink. Because the CFO had just used the one word that ends careers in investigative meetings. Innocent people who are actually innocent never say it. They say show me or let's clarify this. Guilty people say innocent. The general strike you're lying. The general said calmly. It was not an accusation. It was a confirmation. The CFO's demeanor cracked for half a second. Micro-expression analysis would have caught it and labeled it fear spike. The general leaned forward. We checked the legacy systems last night. Nothing is active. Nothing is authorized. Nothing explains the code. He lowered his voice. But you already knew that. The CFO opened her mouth to speak, but Karen spoke first. The second reveal, Karen's real power. Karen placed a third document on the table. This is the part you didn't expect, she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. Everyone leaned in. The CFO hesitated before reaching for the paper. It wasn't financial data. It wasn't an audit Trail. It wasn't a budget discrepancy. It was a timeline cross-referencing, unscheduled, private meetings, anonymous transfers, phantom vendor accounts, the CFO's travel logs, and the dates of the resurrected project code transactions. The CFO's face drained of color because Karen had done something the CFO never anticipated. Karen had connected the human behavior to the financial behavior. She didn't just find the numbers. She found the motive. The CFO's voice suddenly lost its confidence. Where did you get this? Karen exhaled slowly. You left breadcrumbs, she said. You just never expected someone like me to know where to look. The general turned to the CFO, his voice low, lethal. You've been moving money into a shell program that shouldn't exist. And based on Karen's findings, you've been meeting with individuals who have no authorization to access defense-related financial channels. Silence crushed the room. The CFO's fingers twitched. Her breathing sped up. For the first time, she was the one shrinking in her chair. Karen watched her. The woman who had dismissed her, insulted her intelligence, underestimated her, and felt not triumph, but clarity. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was justice. The CFO breaks. All right? The CFO whispered. All right, fine. But you don't understand. It's not what you think. The general's voice cut like a blade. Then explain. The CFO swallowed. Hard. And then she said the one sentence that made every person in the room freeze. It wasn't my idea. When the CFO whispered, it wasn't my idea, the entire room reacted the same way. They stopped breathing. No one moved. No one blinked. Even the air felt like it tightened around the words. Because that sentence, in meetings like this, with stakes like these, is a detonator. It means there is someone else. Someone higher, someone hidden, someone dangerous enough that the CFO, a woman who built her career on manipulation and power, was afraid to even say their name out loud. But the general didn't wait. He didn't soothe. He didn't ease her into it. He demanded, whose idea? There was no room for negotiation in his voice. No softness. No diplomacy. Just the expectation of truth. The CFO looked down like the table had suddenly become fascinating, avoiding eye contact, searching for an escape hatch that didn't exist. Her composure was gone, replaced by a kind of trembling calculation. Karen watched her carefully. This wasn't guilt. This was fear. Real fear. The kind you only feel when the thing behind you is bigger than the threat in front of you. The CFO cracks further eye. Can't, the CFO whispered. The general didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. You can. A long pause. Swallow. A trembling breath. Then finally, it was the board. Not one person reacted outwardly. Years of professional discipline training them to keep their faces neutral. But internally, shock slammed through the room like an earthquake. Karen felt her stomach drop. The board, she said quietly, as in, our board, all of them. The CFO shook her head quickly. No, not all. Just one. One member. One who has influence. The general leaned forward. Name? The CFO squeezed her hands together so tightly her knuckles turned white. She looked like she might vomit. CFO, the general said. This is the last time I'll ask politely. Who gave the order? Her voice was a whisper pinched by terror. Isaac Rennert. The room goes silent. Everyone knew that name. Isaac Rennert wasn't just a board member. He was the board member, the silent kingmaker whose wealth came from the kinds of industries that never made sense until you realized they weren't supposed to. A man with defense ties, intelligence ties, political ties, the kind of figure who didn't show up in news stories, only in classified footnotes. A man who didn't attend board meetings, a man who didn't need to, a man who only appeared when something was about to change. Karen's heart rate jumped. The general's expression hardened into steel. And the CFO kept talking, because once someone starts confessing out of fear, they can't stop. They're trying to outrun the consequences. The CFO's real confession, it started 18 months ago, she said, her voice shaky, but gaining momentum. like a panicked animal explaining a trap. He approached me privately. He said the company needed to restructure some financial channels in order to align with a classified partnership. He told me it was approved at the federal level. The general's jaw clenched. Which federal level? The CFO winced. I don't know. He never showed me documents. He just assured me, said it was secure, said it was authorized above our pay grades. Karen felt heat in her chest. Anger, disbelief, adrenaline. You didn't verify? Karen asked sharply. I couldn't. The CFO snapped back, the fear turning into desperation. You don't verify Isaac Rennert. You don't question him. He told me if I asked too many questions, I'd lose more than my job. The general spoke. Voice, I see. That's not an excuse. The CFO collapsed into silence. The general connects the dots. General turned to Karen, not with softness, but with respect. You said the anomalies began around the same time. A year and a half. Karen nodded. Exactly 18 months. She confirmed. The first redirected funds matched the exact week she just described. The general turned back to the CFO. So you approved an authorized financial rerouting tied to a defunct military project code because Isaac Rennert told you to? Yes, she whispered. And you never told anyone? I couldn't. And you assumed? Karen added that if you kept Karen quiet and buried the inconsistencies under complex enough layers, nobody would find it. The CFO's face tightened because that last part was true. Dead true. The general unloaded. General stood up, and the room felt smaller. You allowed a civilian board member with no direct oversight, no clear access authority, and no verifiable trail to direct covert financial operations into a channel that should not exist. The CFO's voice cracked. I didn't have a choice. The general's response was a verbal bullet. You had obligation, and you failed it. Karen watched the CFO fold inward, as if the weight of her choices had suddenly hit her all at once. No arrogance, no condescension, no smirk. Just a woman who realized she was no longer in control, and maybe never had been. The question that changes everything. Then Karen spoke, cutting through the tension with something sharper than accusation. Why resurrect that code? Everyone turned to her. Karen continued. It wasn't random. If Isaac Rennert needed a channel, he could have built a new one. Instead, he revived a discontinued military cybersecurity project. Why that one? The CFO swallowed. Then she looked up, reluctantly, fearfully, and answered. Because he said that code was the only one the auditors wouldn't touch. The general leaned forward. Why? And the CFO whispered. Because the original program was never actually shut down. The room froze. Karen's mind went white. The general's expression shifted from anger to something darker. Recognition. The CFO pressed on, her voice a trembling rasp. He told me the official closure was a cover, that the real version of the project still exists off record, and that the funds I was redirecting were meant to support it. Karen felt her pulse spike. If that's true, then where is the money really going? The CFO looked at her with haunted eyes. That's the part I don't know. The general's decision without sitting back down. The general spoke. This meeting is over. Everyone stiffened. We're escalating. Immediately. This is now an off-book internal investigation under my authority. No one, and I mean no one, speaks to Rennert. Not a word, not a text, not a breath. His eyes locked onto the CFO. You will remain available until further notice, and you will not leave the building. The CFO didn't argue. She COULD and single quotes T. Karen stood slowly, closing her notebook. But as she did, the general looked at her with an expression Karen had never seen directed at her before. Respect, serious, professional, military respect. Karen, he said, stay. The rest of the room cleared. The door closed. Karen and the general were now alone. The private conversation didn't sit. He didn't soften. He simply asked, how far down the rabbit hole can you go? Karen met his eyes. As far as you need. And for the first time, the general smiled. Not a friendly smile, a predatory one. Good, he said, because we're not dealing with a financial problem anymore. He looked toward the door as if he could see through it. We're dealing with something hidden, something powerful, something that's been running in the dark for years. Karen felt a chill. What do you need me to do? He turned back to her, and his answer was the beginning of everything that would come next. You could feel it the moment the door shut behind the general, and Karen. Something in the air shifted. It wasn't tension. It wasn't fear. It was purpose. A shared, unspoken understanding that they were now a path that wouldn't just expose a crime. It would rip open something that was never meant to be seen. Because when the general said, "Find out what the real project is and who else is involved," he wasn't assigning a task. He was handing Karen a weapon, and she accepted it without blinking. Everything that happened next would define the woman she had become, the woman she had been forced to become. 50 years old, underestimated for half her life, dismissed by people who didn't know she remembered everything, noticed everything, connected everything. But now, all those years of being overlooked suddenly became her sharpest advantage. The general knew it, and he was ready to use it. The moment the others were gone, he moved closer, lowering his voice. "Karen, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room." She nodded without hesitation, because she knew somehow, instinctively, that this was the part where the story stopped being corporate trouble and became something darker. He continued. "The project Rennet referenced, the one tied to that discontinued code. It wasn't discontinued because it failed. It was discontinued because it succeeded too well." Karen's heartbeat quickened. "What do you mean?" The general's jaw tightened. The original program was designed to test a predictive security algorithm. It could map vulnerabilities in real time, financial, digital, even personnel weaknesses. It was powerful, too powerful. Someone decided it should never be fully implemented. Karen whispered. "So they hid it worse?" The general replied. "They buried it inside another buried thing, a kind of shadow architecture only a handful of people knew, and those people had influence. The kind that never has to sign anything." Karen felt a chill crawl up her spine. "And now Renner is using it." The general nodded slowly. "We think so. And if he is, then he's using a tool capable of controlling entire financial systems without anyone noticing." Karen felt her breath catch. "And you think that's where the money went?" "I think," the general said, "that Renner is part of something larger. And I think your CFO was just the first exposed thread." Karen's pulse hammered. "Then where do we start?" The general's eyes locked onto hers. "With the digital trail you already found." They left the room together, not as an executive and a military advisor anymore, but as two operatives aligned under necessity. Karen followed him to a restricted access workspace. She had never been inside before. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't high-tech. It was something better. A room designed for people who understood secrets. No windows, thick walls to terminals, air-gapped from the rest of the building. "Sit," he instructed. Karen took her seat immediately. The general moved behind her, arms crossed behind his back like a man preparing for war. "Open your files." Karen's fingers flew across the keys. Every document she had collected, every anomaly she had flagged, every concealed transfer, every piece of the financial labyrinth. She spread it all across the screen like a map of a battlefield. The general studied it. "We start here," he said, pointing at a cluster of transactions. These transfers weren't just hidden. They were guided. Guided? Karen asked. Yes. Not random. Not sloppy. Not desperate. Calculated. Someone was funneling money into a side infrastructure. But the pattern isn't purely financial. Karen zoomed in as she traced the timeline out. Something clicked in her mind. These aren't just monetary movements, she whispered. They're synchronized. The general nodded. Synchronized with what? Karen clicked deeper. Her eyes scanned, searched. Connected. Then she froze. Her breath hitched. Oh my God, she whispered, because she had found it. A pattern. A repeating sequence tied to. No. It couldn't be. But it was. The transfers were aligned with the operational testing timeline of the original classified algorithm, the one from the supposedly discontinued program. The general saw the realization hit her. You see it. he said. Karen nodded slowly, fear and determination swirling inside her. The algorithm is running again, she whispered. Someone turned it back on. The general didn't look surprised. We suspected as much. Karen felt a cold rush through her. How long? The general answered with a heavy exhale. Long enough. Karen sat back, stunned. If the algorithm was running, then every vulnerability in the system, financial, procedural, operational, was being mapped by whoever controlled it. Renner wasn't just using a secret tool. He was using a weapon. And the CFO wasn't the architect. She was a pawn. Karen closed her eyes, absorbing the weight of it. How do we stop it? The general didn't smile, didn't soften, didn't pretend it would be easy. We don't stop it yet. Karen blinked. What? He leaned forward. We follow it. Karen's eyes widened. You want to let it keep running? Yes, he said firmly. If we shut it down now, Renner will know we're onto him. He'll vanish, and he won't vanish alone. Karen swallowed hard. What do you mean? The general paused, long enough that Karen understood the next words were the kind that change a person. He has allies, Karen, powerful ones. People with access to things they should never have had. People we need to expose all at once. The room froze. Karen's mind went white. The general's expression shifted from anger to something darker. Recognition. The CFO pressed on, her voice a trembling rasp. He told me the official closure was a cover, that the real version of the project still exists off record, and that the funds I was redirecting were meant to support it. Karen felt her pulse spike. If that's true, then where is the money really going? The CFO looked at her with haunted eyes. That's the part I don't know. The general's decision without sitting back down. The general spoke. This meeting is over. Everyone stiffened. We're escalating. Immediately. This is now an off-book internal investigation under my authority. No one, and I mean no one, speaks to Rennert. Not a word, not a text, not a breath. His eyes locked onto the CFO. You will remain available until further notice, and you will not leave the building. The CFO didn't argue. She COULD and single quotes T. Karen stood slowly, closing her notebook. But as she did, the general looked at her with an expression Karen had never seen directed at her before. Respect, serious, professional, military respect. Karen, he said, stay. The rest of the room cleared. The door closed. Karen and the general were now alone. The private conversation didn't sit. He didn't soften. He simply asked, how far down the rabbit hole can you go? Karen met his eyes. As far as you need. And for the first time, the general smiled. Not a friendly smile, a predatory one. Good, he said, because we're not dealing with a financial problem anymore. He looked toward the door as if he could see through it. We're dealing with something hidden, something powerful, something that's been running in the dark for years. Karen felt a chill. What do you need me to do? He turned back to her, and his answer was the beginning of everything that would come next. You could feel it the moment the door shut behind the general and Karen. Something in the air shifted. It wasn't tension. It wasn't fear. It was purpose. A shared and spoken understanding that they were now a path that wouldn't just expose a crime. It would rip open something that was never meant to be seen. Because when the general said, find out what the real project is and who else is involved, he wasn't assigning a task. He was handing Karen a weapon, and she accepted it without blinking. Everything that happened next would define the woman she had become, the woman she had been forced to become. 50-4 years old, underestimated for half her life, dismissed by people who didn't know she remembered everything, noticed everything, connected everything. But now, all those years of being overlooked suddenly became her sharpest advantage. The general knew it, and he was ready to use it. The moment the others were gone, he moved closer, lowering his voice. Karen, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. She nodded without hesitation, because she knew somehow, instinctively, that this was the part where the story stopped being corporate trouble and became something darker. He continued. The project Rennet referenced, the one tied to that discontinued code. It wasn't discontinued because it failed. It was discontinued because it succeeded too well. Karen's heartbeat quickened. What do you mean? The general's jaw tightened. The original program was designed to test a predictive security algorithm. It could map vulnerabilities in real time, financial, digital, even personnel weaknesses. It was powerful, too powerful. Someone decided it should never be fully implemented. Karen whispered. So they hid it. Worse? The general replied. They buried it inside another buried thing, a kind of shadow architecture only a handful of people knew, and those people had influence. The kind that never has to sign anything. Karen felt a chill crawl up her spine. And now Renner is using it. The general nodded slowly. We think so. And if he is, then he's using a tool capable of controlling entire financial systems without anyone noticing. Karen felt her breath catch. And you think that's where the money went? I think, the general said, that Renard is part of something larger. And I think your CFO was just the first exposed thread. Karen's pulse hammered. Then where do we start? The general's eyes locked onto hers. With the digital trail you already found, they left the room together. Not as an executive and a military advisor anymore, but as two operatives aligned under necessity. Karen followed him to a restricted access workspace she had never been inside before. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't high-tech. It was something better. A room designed for people who understood secrets. No windows, thick walls to terminals, air-gapped from the rest of the building. Sit, he instructed. Karen took her seat immediately. The general moved behind her, arms crossed behind his back like a man preparing for war. Open your files. Karen's fingers flew across the keys. Every document she had collected, every anomaly she had flagged, every concealed transfer, every piece of the financial labyrinth. She spread it all across the screen like a map of a battlefield. The general studied it. We start here, he said, pointing at a cluster of transactions. These transfers weren't just hidden. They were guided. Guided? Karen asked. Yes. Not random. Not sloppy. Not desperate. Calculated. Someone was funneling money into a side infrastructure. But the pattern isn't purely financial. Karen zoomed in as she traced the timeline out. Something clicked in her mind. These aren't just monetary movements, she whispered. They're synchronized. The general nodded. Synchronized with what? Karen clicked deeper. Her eyes scanned, searched. Connected. Then she froze. Her breath hitched. Oh my God, she whispered, because she had found it. A pattern, a repeating sequence tied to. No. It couldn't be. But it was. The transfers were aligned with the operational testing timeline of the original classified algorithm, the one from the supposedly discontinued program. The general saw the realization hit her. You see it, he said. Karen nodded slowly, fear and determination swirling inside her. The algorithm is running again, she whispered. Someone turned it back on. The general didn't look surprised. We suspected as much. Karen felt a cold rush through her. How long? The general answered with a heavy exhale. Long enough. Karen sat back, stunned. If the algorithm was running, then every vulnerability in the system, financial, procedural, operational, was being mapped by whoever controlled it. Renner wasn't just using a secret tool. He was using a weapon. And the CFO wasn't the architect. She was a pawn. Karen closed her eyes, absorbing the weight of it. How do we stop it? The general didn't smile, didn't soften, didn't pretend it would be easy. We don't stop it yet. Karen blinked. What? He leaned forward. We follow it. Karen's eyes widened. You want to let it keep running? Yes, he said firmly. If we shut it down now, Renner will know we're onto him. He'll vanish, and he won't vanish alone. Karen swallowed hard. What do you mean? The general paused, long enough that Karen understood the next words were the kind that change a person. He has allies, Karen, powerful ones. People with access to things they should never have had. People we need to expose all at once.